So I have the equation for a circle in standard form written on the right, and another equation for a circle, which is definitely not in standard form, written on the left. My first job is to get the one on the left into standard form. So what I'm going to do is rewrite the equation from the left, except I'm going to group everything together according to x's and y's. And you can see I'm kind of trying to arrange it the way the equation in magenta is written here. Let's see if we can get these minus signs right. So that's going to be minus 18y. And then I'm moving the negative 6 over to the right side because that's going to start forming what will later become the radius. We're nowhere near that point yet, though. So the first thing I'm going to do is factor out my GCF. Now, you don't need to take this step. You could divide both sides by 3. But I like factoring out the GCF because that's more commonly a useful step. Not always, but in this case, we can be fine this way. And what you might notice here is I've got an x squared, I've got an x, but I've got no number in each of these parentheses. So let's see if we can go about making that number appear. And if you remember the little trick for this, if you take the number in front of the linear term and you divide it by 2 and then you square it, that's going to tell you what your constant should be, okay? So in this case, that turns out to be 9. Now watch how I'm going to rewrite this thing. This technique is called completing the square, and I would say it's probably the hardest and most important thing that we have to do in this unit on circles. It's really more about getting practice with completing the square. So I'm going to add a plus 9 in there to that parentheses to complete its square, and that way I'll be able to factor it very nicely. And I will do something very similar, though I'm going to skip the actual step of showing you how to do that. You can do it very similarly to what I did, but I'm going to show you the result right here for the y's. So that's going to be a plus 9 for that one. Okay, and what does it equal? Well, it equals that negative 6 from before. And here's sometimes what people forget. What you need to do is you need to add those numbers that we added on the left because we're balancing an equation. And not just those numbers, but the GCFs for them also. So see how I'm adding the 9s. Okay, the 9s should be very obvious. These 9s right here, that's these guys over here. But what's sometimes not obvious, and people forget, put this in rainbow color, that's the 3, the GCF right there. Okay, so if you're comfortable with this equation, great, we're moving on. If not, pause, take some time to figure out what happened there. And now, watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to factor each of these guys, which you should by now know this pattern of perfect squares. But if you're not too comfortable with it, well, you're going to get lots of practice. Don't worry about that. So 54, I think this is going to be 49 on the right side. Double check my math, but that looks good. And, you know, something's looking weird about this, actually. 3 times 9 is 27 plus 27. Oh, yeah, that's going to be 48. Okay, weekend math. So now I'm going to divide each side by 3. And again, I could have done this at the very beginning, but I prefer showing that GCF step because sometimes you can't divide by this as cleanly at the beginning. Often you can, but I didn't want to generalize. So now if you notice, compare again to our standard form equation. I've got this thing in standard form. And this right here tells me that h comma k, in other words, the center of the circle, is going to equal negative 3 comma 3, okay? And r, the radius, well, r squared is 16, okay? So if r squared is 16, I don't really care about r squared too much. I'm going to knock that out and say, okay, r equals 4. Now, those are some of the things this problem was asking for. It wants the standard form of the equation, which is this thing I wrote right here. It wants the center point location, which is going to be in coordinate form, negative 3 comma 3. It wants the length of the radius, that's 4. And now all that's left is to just draw a nice circle. So at negative 3 comma 3, there's my center point right here. And if I think about the radius being 4, well, that's going to stretch out like 1, 2, 3, 4 over to here. Okay, so what I usually do is just put some dots, 1, 2, 3, 4. Put some dots like this, 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you're drawing this on paper, this is the way you get something that wouldn't embarrass you too much, right? This is reasonably circle shaped. You're never really going to be an expert at it. But if you're using the computer, then it'll be easier. There's a tool for drawing those things. You can see it right here, how to draw circles.